Roald Dahl's been cancelled! It's those bloody Snoke Woeflakes at it again. Don't they care about history? Preserving art as it is? What gives them the right to go around making changes to classics? Where will this end?
Readers and fans are sounding off after reports that many of his books will be updated with new language.
A debate over censorship stemming from backlash to the news that new copies of his beloved children's and young adult works will be changed.
His iconic books, which have entertained millions of children around the world for decades, have received a woke makeover.
Apparently, Bahari said the estate had partnered with Inclusive Minds, an organization that champions diversity and accessibility in children's literature. The woke censorship regime is here, and it is ugly.
In his book, The Witches, a paragraph explaining that witches are bald beneath their wigs ends with a new line, there are plenty of other reasons why women might wear wigs, and there is certainly nothing wrong with that.
These people know no shame.
Sanitizing, this whitewashing.
Cultural vandalism. An attempt to rewrite history.
Because we now live under what is effectively a marshmallow totalitarianism.
Woke.
Wokey. So this could be China.
Government-approved cultural diarrhea.
You might have caught wind of the drama. On the 17th of February 2023, The Telegraph published an article detailing the decision by Puffin Children's Books and the Roald Dahl Story Company, owned by Netflix, to edit the books of beloved children's author Roald Dahl. The aim of these edits, according to numerous news outlets, was to remove or adjust language that might be considered offensive to contemporary readers. To put it lightly, this caused an absolute outrage in the media, both traditional and social, to the extent that only a week after the Telegraph article was first published, on the 24th of February, Puffin announced they will be publishing the Roald Dahl Classic Collection, which won't contain the new edits, alongside the new Puffin Roald Dahl books for young readers, which do. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's settled then. Both versions are being published. People can choose which version they'd rather read or read to their children. But the initial outrage surrounding the Dahl edits raises some intriguing concerns about the ethics of writing, the value of history, and the slippery nature of censorship. Doing my research, I was struck by the incredibly aggressive response of certain news outlets. The fear repeatedly expressed that to censor a book or a franchise is a slippery slope, the premium placed on personal choice, and the powerful connection between identity, freedom, and fandom. This kind of story affects us all, whether we're Dahl fans or not, because it raises serious questions about the media we consume. So it's worth pausing over and understanding. It's worth considering the different viewpoints that make up this most passionate and vitriolic of literary debates. What is censorship? Is it ever okay to edit an author's works? What, if anything, gives us the right to rewrite? But before we tackle those big questions, it's important to understand what actually are these edits that have caused such a stir. In this article, The Rewriting of Roald Dahl, The Telegraph claims to have listed in this handy table every edit to the Dahl books made by Puffin in conjunction with Inclusive Minds, an organisation who, in their own words, work towards breaking down barriers and challenging stereotypes to ensure that every child can access and enjoy great books that are representative of our diverse society. Clearly a hive mind of evil authoritarian censors if ever I heard of one, but more on them later. So on the left-hand side of the table, you've got words and phrases included in the 2001 editions of the books, and on the right, you can see how they've been changed for the new editions, or you'll see the word removed where some text has been removed. I'm going to begin by saying that there are quite a few edits that, based on this table, I either don't understand the value of, or don't personally think are necessary. For example, I don't get why in George's Marvellous Medicine they changed the word ouch to ugh. And I don't understand why they removed the phrase, "I'll take your word for it," Sophie said, from the BFG. Then there's some violent or grotesque imagery that was altered that I don't really see as problematic, like changing "she had pale brown teeth and a small puckered up mouth like a dog's bottom" to "she had rotting teeth and a small puckered up mouth like a dog's bottom from years of frowning." Or changing "this powder, if eaten, will make the dog explode" to "this powder, if eaten, will make the dog hop like a flea." And I don't really understand the decision to remove the word black in this example from the BFG. Flattening his tall, thin, black-cloaked body against the side of the building becomes flattening his tall, thin, cloaked body against the side of the building. And in SEO Trot, I'm not sure about the value of changing "you never know," Mr. Hoppy said darkly, "you never know," to "you never know," Mr. Hoppy said mysteriously, "you never know." I could guess at the reasoning behind these edits, but I don't fully or immediately understand them. I'm not mad about it, and I'm also aware that just because I don't personally understand some of these changes, it doesn't mean there aren't people out there who do. And I think it's important to point out here that despite the fact that most newspapers loved to fixate on the idea that these edits have been made to avoid offending people, some of them are just updates to the language, to remove words that aren't necessarily offensive, but also aren't used in contemporary vernacular as such, words that children today might not understand. And while there are some edits I don't personally see the value of, there are many others that I absolutely do. Now, one thing that has cropped up time and again in criticism of the Dahl edits is that these books are products of their time. They were written decades ago, and so they include certain sentiments we don't, or shouldn't, share today. I want to put a pin in that. Let's just imagine that the words and sentences we're about to read are taken from a book first published today in 2023. Let's forget for a few minutes whether we should or shouldn't alter the works of a dead writer, whether doing so or not doing so is a slippery slope, what this could mean for the bigger picture in terms of literary and cultural censorship, which are concerns I don't want to invalidate, I understand their value. But let's start by instead having a closer look at what some of these changes actually are in and of themselves. Let's start with some examples from The Witches. There was something indecent about a bald woman was removed, and the following sentence was added. Besides, there are plenty of other reasons why women might wear wigs, and there is certainly nothing wrong with that. The word queer was changed to strange, and this sentence was removed. A boy it will be, for a certainty, because girls are not keeping pet mice. So right off the bat, Dahl's use of the word queer in The Witches means strange, so changing it to strange avoids conflating queerness from a 21st century perspective with being weird or other. So yeah, I'd think it old-fashioned for a book published in 2023 to use queer to mean strange. A lot of the edits update language to reflect contemporary meaning, both to avoid causing offence and to incorporate words and phrases children reading today are more likely to relate to and understand. We see this kind of alteration again in Matilda, in which the school matron becomes the school nurse, thus removing the gender stereotyping surrounding the word matron and updating the term to reflect a child's experience of school today. It's an awareness of gendered language and stereotyping that seems to inform the decision to remove or edit references to baldness in The Witches. If I read this quote, casually thrown into a children's book published in 2023, I'd be concerned that it was upholding what feels like another weird, outdated stereotype, that women should have long hair and that baldness for women is somehow wrong or unnatural. The addition of this quote supports that point. The wording's a bit ham-fisted, but I get why they'd include it. A lot of the edits do this. They get rid of gender stereotyping. I'd find it odd for a book published in 2023 to assume only boys have pet mice, and I'd appreciate a book that doesn't gender place or objects. In George's Marvellous Medicine, Father's tool shed and Mummy's dressing table are replaced by the tool shed and the dressing table. Now I just need to pause this more serious assessment of the edits to reflect on one of the changes that made me laugh, child that I am, and that's the removal of the word horny. In George's Marvellous Medicine, for example, horny finger becomes bony finger. In James and the Giant Peach, James was promptly flung across the room into old green grasshopper's horny lap, was edited to get rid of the offending word. The word horny means both sexually aroused and horn-like, but today I'd bet more people use it to mean the former, so yeah, I can understand that one too. From a 2023 perspective, I think the less we use the word horny in children's books, the better. Across multiple books, mothers and fathers are now parents. The Cloud Men from James and the Giant Peach are now Cloud People. And the sentence about their wives crouching over little stoves with frying pans in their hands, frying snowballs for their husbands' suppers, has been removed. The edits also do things like turn firemen into firefighters, and the Oompa Loompas are now referred to as people rather than as men. And in a book first published in 2023, these are things I would be happy to see. Fewer assumptions about gender roles, the inclusion of non-binary or genderless characters, the acknowledgement that some firefighters are not men. And if adjusting an incredibly popular children's franchise by making Oompa Loompas gender neutral helps make non-binary and agender children feel included in some way, then great. And remember, we've still got that pin in the "these books are products of their time" argument. Speaking of Oompa Loompas, another alteration is to language in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory that, you could argue, puts a weirdly positive spin on slavery. So I shipped them all over here. Every man, woman and child in the Oompa Loompa tribe becomes "so they all agreed to come over, each and every Oompa Loompa." And It was easy. I smuggled them over in large packing cases with holes in them, and they all got here safely. They all speak English now, was changed to, they've told me they love it here. You could argue that by the very nature of their role within the story, the Oompa Loompas are always going to be contentious, and to remove that contention entirely would involve rewriting the entire book. So one argument could be that the 2023 edits are pointless because they can only modify the language. They can't remove the uncomfortable racist undercurrents that are baked right into the story. And it's not just Charlie and the Chocolate Factory that was altered in an attempt to remove a problematic depiction of race. In SEO Trot, the phrase weird African language is changed to African language, and sections from the BFG were removed to get rid of this uncomfortable dialogue. Every night, unpleasant things are happening in Baghdad, the Sultan said. We are chopping off people's heads like you are chopping parsley. If I saw this dialogue normalised in a children's book published in 2023, I'd be shocked and concerned at the racial stereotyping. Now, you might be sat there screaming, but these books weren't published in 2023! That's the point! And we'll get there, I promise. Just suspend your disbelief and indulge me a while longer. Another contentious issue that the edits address is the use of the word fat and the descriptions of fat people. Now, a lot's been said about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and the decision to change the description of Augustus Gloop from fat to enormous, and whether that's really any better. And yeah, I mean, it's not much better at all, I don't think. More than this, the reported removal of the word fat across all of Dahl's books could be perceived as tone-deaf because it sweeps the word under the rug and works to reaffirm it as negative. In the name of body neutrality, isn't it better to move away from the association between fat equals unhealthy or fat equals bad? You could argue that if the edits have removed any use of the word fat, doesn't that make them part of the problem? But in a lot of these examples, the word fat isn't used in a positive or a neutral sense. Fat, in Dahl, and in many children's books, seems a resoundingly negative thing to be. Take this description of Mrs. Wormwood from Matilda. She wore heavy makeup and had one of those unfortunate bulging figures where the flesh appears to be strapped in all round the body to prevent it from falling out. Or this from James and the Giant Peach. Aunt Sponge was terrifically fat, and tremendously flabby at that. Her tummy and waist were as soggy as paste, it was worse on the place where she sat. Augustus Gloop had great flabby folds bulging out all over the place, and his face was like a monstrous ball of dough. And Mrs. Salt is described as a great fat creature with short legs, and she was blowing like a rhinoceros. The edits attempt to alter or do away with these unequivocally negative references to fatness. Now, you might be thinking, Dahl refers to mean Aunt Spiker from James and the Giant Peach in a damning rhyme too, and Spiker is skinny. In fact, she's thin as a wire and dry as a bone, only drier. She was so long and thin, if you carried her in, you could use her for poking the fire. And by the way, this rhyme about Spiker was also altered in the edits. So you could argue that it's not that Dahl is fat-shaming, as much as he is using grotesque physical extremes to illustrate the nasty personalities of James's aunts. But from looking down the list, Dahl does seem to have a penchant for equating fatness with meanness, with the unsavoury characters in his stories. As Sarah Shafi puts it, if a character's whole villainy is predicated on the fact that they have a scar or that they are overweight, then I think it's actually a case where you need to wonder what that says about us as a society and the writer's work. If I read an author's books published in 2023, and in multiple cases a character's fatness was an indicator of their negative traits or bad personality, I'd think that a damaging stereotype to perpetuate. But here we go. Let's remove the pin. Roald Dahl wasn't writing in 2023. James and the Giant Peach came out in 1961, and he wrote and published most of his books in the 70s and 80s before his death in 1990. His books, therefore, are products of their time, and I think it goes without saying that that means they'll almost inevitably contain words, phrases, and stereotypes that we don't as readily publish in children's literature today. And this begs a question. Should we edit a book written in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s to appeal to our 21st century sensibilities? The answer, for a lot of people, is no.
The Thought Police have taken a meat cleaver to some of the best-loved children's stories of all time.
But removal is an obliteration of the past. Obliteration of the past is actually fundamentally an obliteration of the truth.
an attempt to rewrite history.
That is a crime against truth.
I think reading should be enjoyable, it should be fun, there is no enormous high-mindedness about it. It should be fun and great.
Soon we will never laugh at another joke. We'll never dance to another song.
Banning Jane Austen novels to decolonise universities.
Matilda reads Jane Austen rather than Rudyard Kipling. Why?
Is a child that doesn't have a parent to explain going to be given a Roald Dahl? No,
absolutely, because they're in the library at school.
And the Oompa Loompas have gone gender neutral.
Just in case any of the small men wanted to become small women or small non-binaries.
And also, references to mothers and fathers have been removed and now changed to parents or family, because Matilda apparently had two dads. One of them was just trans.
Pathetic so-called sensitivity readers.
So-called sensitivity readers.
Who are these sensitivity readers?
Sensitivity reader.
Well, those used to be called editors.
If you're anything like me, when one of my producers even dare to change one word or even a comma in my opening monologue, they will hear the words and in an unmistakable touch it and I will kill you tone, don't touch my monologue.
Nobody is saying to children, let's watch Pulp Fiction. Everybody believes on a certain level.
What about reading the Bible?
It's going to go vegan, isn't it?
Well, Hitler himself was a painter.
Not a very good one.
I think this has become intellectually dishonest at this point.
While some felt the edits weren't a problem and would hopefully make Dahl's writing more inclusive, the response was mostly negative. Some felt that the changes were insulting to a child's intelligence, that altering certain words to clear up and modernise the language came with the assumption that a child is too stupid to understand older phrases or words. Others argued that there are still books being published for the first time today in 2023 that are racist, sexist and bigoted in lots of ways. So why waste time editing books of the past when books of the present are still problematic? People really like to point out that hundreds of changes have been made to the books, though a spokesperson for the publishers argued that within the context of the word count of the wider books, these textual changes are minimal. Roald Dahl's stories remain unchanged and his mischievous spirit undiminished. Some called the edits PC gone mad. The word woke was bandied about to no end. Some argued that the very point of Roald Dahl's books is his wicked sense of humour, and that's what appeals to children. To sanitise it is to lose the essence of the storytelling that children enjoy. Piers Morgan called it
cultural vandalism
and said the edits shamed people for using perfectly normal words, while Peter Hitchens called it a
crime against truth.
And heck, we don't want to woke those normal truth words or we'll stop sensing make in the blink of an eye. Suzanne Moore, writing for The Telegraph, called the sensitivity readers... I should pause here and explain something. Almost every report on the edits refers to Inclusive Minds, who worked in conjunction with Puffin on the edits, and their band of sensitivity readers, a term which has gleaned much mockery. But, according to Inclusive Minds, they are not sensitivity readers. If a sensitivity reader is someone who reads a literary work looking for perceived offensive content, stereotypes and bias, creating a report for an author or publisher with suggested changes, Inclusive Minds offers the service of inclusion ambassadors, whose role it is to share nuances related to their lived experience as characters are created and plots are developed. This makes it very different from sensitivity reading. Involving our ambassadors is not about cutting potentially controversial content, but rather about including and embedding authenticity and inclusive voices and experiences from the outset. So, regardless of what you think about sensitivity readers or inclusion ambassadors, what we might deduce from this is that it wasn't the job of Inclusive Minds to comb through Dahl for offensive terms. It sounds like their job was to discuss their own experiences of marginalisation and discrimination with the editors working for the publishers to offer their unique insight. But of course, everyone loves to jump on the "look at those evil woke sensitivity readers ruining our favourite books" bandwagon. It would seem to me that if you want to be angry at someone, be angry at Puffin and Netflix, not Inclusive Minds. Anyway, we're back in. Suzanne Moore, writing for The Telegraph, called the sensitivity readers mutant authoritarians in the service of deadening compliance, and called the edits a sign of the further degradation of the publishing industry, the most nepotistic and middle-class clan you could ever meet. To which singer-songwriter Billy Bragg tweeted in retaliation, "Suppose your mum wears a hairpiece due to chemotherapy, and kids in your class call her a witch because they read in Dahl's book that witches all wear wigs. You'd think that as a feminist, Suzanne Moore would have some sympathy, but no, because woke." Susan Nossel, speaking on behalf of PEN America, tweeted that if we start down the path of trying to correct for perceived slights, instead of allowing readers to receive and react to books as written, we risk distorting the work of great authors and clouding the essential lens that literature offers on society. The Queen Consort weighed in, urging authors to remain true to your calling, unimpeded by those who may wish to curb the freedom of your expression or impose limits on your imagination. Even Rishi Sunak voiced his view via a spokesperson that when it comes to our rich and varied literary heritage, the Prime Minister agrees with the BFG that we shouldn't gobble funk around with words. We have always defended the right to free speech and expression. Lots of people kept referencing George Orwell's 1984, and this passage in particular. Every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book rewritten. Every picture has been repainted, every statue and street building has been renamed, every date has been altered. And the process is continuing, day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. Salman Rushdie tweeted that Roald Dahl was no angel, but this is absurd censorship. Puffin Books and the Dahl estate should be ashamed. Lots of people argued we should leave the books as they are. Others thought including a content warning at the start of the books to contextualise outdated language and sentiments was the way forward. And some, like author Philip Pullman, argued that if Dahl's writing offends us, let him go out of print. Read all these wonderful authors who are writing today who don't get as much of a look in because of the massive commercial gravity of people like Roald Dahl. Then there was a characteristically inane take offered by Boris Johnson who, according to The Guardian, in one breath criticises sensitivity edit of authors' works and also rejects sending Parthenon marbles to Greece, expressing his irritation at wokeness and political correctness, while arguing at the same time, I guess, that returning the Parthenon marbles to Greece would leave a huge gap in the British Museum's ability to tell the story of world history, and worries that if you give everything back to Greece, and I'm quoting here, above all, you have no answer in the years ahead to the theoretical claims for restitution from Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, Nigeria, everywhere, whose treasures are housed in Bloomsbury. And suddenly, in trying to please the world and correct thinking, you've deprived the world of one of its great treasures and cut some vital panels from its great pageant of human progress. Then he added that the public's freedom to call him a wanker while he was out jogging showed what a wonderful country Britain was, which I can't argue with. But then he used this as an example of how minimal is the distance between the government and the governed. It was a very short article, but it took me on a journey. As you can see, the Dahl edits gleaned a seismic reaction. Now, this is a lot of information to take in, there are lots of opinions flying around, so I'm going to try and boil it down to the two arguments that crop up time and again in the articles and videos weighing in on the Dahl debate. And they are the rewriting of history argument. This goes something like, Dahl wrote some bigoted things, but if we remove them from his work, we're pretending they were never written, that people never spoke that way and never used those words. Children shouldn't be shielded from the past. They should be taught that this is a word people used, this is why it's bad, and look at the progress we've made. Then there's the slippery slope argument that goes, if we allow these edits to be made, we open the door to more extreme forms of literary censorship. Letting this happen now will lead to that happening in the future. Now, I understand these arguments, and I agree with them in theory. But in practice, when applied to the Dahl edits to this specific situation, something doesn't sit right with me. And I think it's the lack of nuance. It's the fear-mongering that takes these edits, which by themselves are, I would say, pretty harmless, to extremes. Now, I'm particularly irked by the rewriting of history as a concept. While, of course, it's incredibly important not to paint over the uglier aspects of the past, to own up to them and to face them to ensure we don't repeat them, we also rewrite history all the time, and it's important to do so because history is always evolving. To assume that history is all fact and all set in stone is incorrect. History is told through a subjective perspective, inevitably. And, historically, that perspective has been that of the white, straight, cis, wealthy, victorious male. So let's not pretend history is this immovable mass of absolute truth. A lot of it needs rewriting, not to erase what's happened, but to make room for and to reflect the lives, experiences, and stories of more people. And in this case, I don't believe that editing Roald Dahl is rewriting history. Yeah, if we edited every book ever written beyond recognition and repeated that process on a daily basis, we'd have a problem, but this isn't that. This is one example of editing that's been seized by the press and taken to extremes, and that also seems to ignore the fact that texts are edited all the time in various different ways and for various different reasons. As a spokesperson for Puffin stressed, it's not unusual for publishers to review and update language as the meaning and impact of words changes over time. I've also spoken to a fair few people who say that when they're reading Dahl to their kids, they actually edit as they read aloud, so parents and teachers are already updating the language. This isn't new, what Puffin are doing to Dahl. But you might be asking, where will it end? It's a slippery slope. If we edit Dahl today, what's to stop anyone taking any text and editing it however they see fit tomorrow? This is kind of what the Orwell quote suggests, right? And I get it. But again, to me, that's taking this one instance of editing to dystopian extremes. The slippery slope argument seems to imply that the Dahl edits will be the catalyst for a wave of censorship that grips the world and changes it beyond recognition. But the truth is that the editing of children's literature was alive and well long before February 2023. Thomas Bowdler published The Family Shakespeare in 1807, an edition of Shakespeare's plays edited by his sister Henrietta for a family audience, giving us the term Bowdlerised. Abridged versions of classic children's stories like Alice in Wonderland and Little Women were routinely published in the 20th century. And outdated terms and racist language in Enid Blyton's books have been removed. I'd like to think that the majority of people don't miss Blyton's racial slurs, and that their removal hasn't erased history or sent us whizzing down a slippery slope so slippery we can't tell a book from a cat. And I'd like to think that removing the outdated terms in Roald Dahl won't lead the majority of people into a pit of despair, only able to frantically exclaim,
"We'll never dance to another song."
As school librarian Lucas Maxwell puts it, unfortunately, when things like this happen, it brings out the worst in those who claim that they can no longer say whatever they want, which is untrue. You can still say whatever you want, it's just that now there are more consequences to offensive behaviour. And this is what they're actually upset about, being called out on this. Now, you might be thinking, okay, all that aside, how can you see the value in any of these edits? How can you think they're worth considering? Even if Dahl does contain outdated or offensive terms, we shouldn't be sanitising literature. And I'd like to answer that by drawing attention to the fact that these are children's books. As Justin Lee Anderson, writing for The Bookseller, argues, children are sponges. They're constantly learning from the world around them about what is normal, what's acceptable, and where their place is. And they don't only learn what we mean to teach them. So I think it's not just valid, but vital to ask, what are we inadvertently teaching children? Now, my instinct is that books written for adults that contain offensive or outdated language and ideas shouldn't be edited in the same way that Dahl's books have been, because most adults are capable of contextualising the content. It's unlikely that an adult will read a racist slur in a book and think, well, my favourite author uses it, so I'm going to use it. A child, naive of the context, might. But am I being dismissive of the potential dangers that arise when we edit a book out of its time? We're still left with the question of censorship. And censorship is a very, very complicated question. To be for or against censorship as such is to assume a freedom no one has. Censorship is. That quote probably sounds quite menacing, but I think it elucidates an important point. That censorship exists in many, many forms, has done for a very long time, and that it's a lot more complicated than a simple for or against stance. Censorship is nothing new. In ancient Rome, the censor was an elected official whose job it was to do things like maintain the census and to ensure moral conduct amongst the people. And fun fact, the word censor is related via the Latin censere, meaning to assess or tax, to our word for the official count of members of a population, census. In ancient China, a censor was a government official charged primarily with the responsibility for scrutinising and criticising the conduct of officials and rulers. During Shakespeare's heyday at the end of the 16th century, it was the job of the master of the revels to read through and, you guessed it, censor plays before they could be published. And the publication history of Shakespeare's sonnets has an interesting relationship to editing and censorship, including a revision in 1640 in which the love poems addressed to the young man were revised to instead address a woman. We've been censoring since the dawn of civilization, and, as you might have guessed, how we choose what to censor has evolved based on our social, religious, and political sensibilities. The Catholic Church, for example, was behind the fig leaf campaign of the 1500s, during which proponents hunted for all the nude sculptures in Rome and started the campaign of carefully placing metal fig leaves to cover the genitals. The fig leaf was symbolic of sin. Adam and Eve covered their shameful naked bodies with fig leaves in the Bible, and so nudity, under the fig leaf campaign, was censored. Religion has often been a driving force behind different forms of censorship. In 1642, when England was without a monarch and ruled by Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth, theatres were closed for 18 years because the presiding Puritan view was that plays were filled with lascivious mirth and levity incompatible with the seriousness and focus required of a true Christian of the realm. And P.S., when the monarchy was restored in 1660 and the playhouses reopened, a tidal wave of incredibly smutty plays took the stage by storm. Fast forward to January 2023, and you'll find Republican politicians orchestrating anti-drag legislation in at least 14 bills across at least 8 states that seeks to, you guessed it again, censor drag performances in a way that closely coincides with the widespread anti-trans backlash and homophobic agenda, such as Florida's Don't Say Gay legislation that curtails the discussion of LGBTQ+ issues in schools. And let's not forget the literal banning of books about race and LGBTQ+ topics in conservative states. Now, these are mere drops in the ocean of examples I could use to illustrate the point that censorship has a long history that reflects the sensibilities of an age. Right now, for example, we're in the middle of a vehement anti-trans hate storm, so censoring drag and discouraging discussions of LGBTQ+ issues is perceived by bigots as a way of doing what those Roman censors did thousands of years ago, ensuring moral conduct. So, you might be thinking, oh my god, censorship is horrific. Just look at those examples. It's oppressive, it's life-threatening. Censorship is a tool used to subordinate anyone who doesn't meet the status quo. But does this mean that censorship is, without fail, a tool used by bigots for the purposes of oppression? Alas, it is, of course, far more complicated than that. And a lot of it is a matter of perspective. As Catherine O'Leary puts it, censorship has always been with us in some form in all societies, and may be simultaneously viewed as positive or negative. The term itself can refer to various types of restriction and control, and it's affected by changing social and political contexts. It's linked to a series of concepts such as freedom of expression, decency, political correctness, and the common good, which are also difficult to define and are open to conflicting interpretations. This is a gigantic and incredibly fraught concept to discuss, so I'm going to boil it down as best I can. In certain circumstances, and from certain perspectives, censorship oppresses minorities. In others, and to others, it protects them. Where some disagree with the need to balance other rights with the freedom of expression, insisting that the latter is a fundamental right and that free speech is always going to be hurtful, so deal with it, others argue that censorship can be protective, productive, and progressive. Anti-discrimination laws, for example, that, in theory, prevent people from being discriminated against because of their race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, etc., censor, again in theory, people from spouting hateful drivel without consequence. According to O'Leary, many people, particularly in contemporary Western democratic societies, are willing to accept, if not advocate, a range of limitations on freedom of expression, often linked to the imposition of restrictions on racist, homophobic, or misogynistic texts or speech acts, or for the protection of children. What is appropriate to do or say in any given society at a given time is in part a result of censorship. It's why white writers of however many years ago freely used the N-word in their novels to describe black people, and why we don't, or certainly shouldn't, do that now. It's why this horrendously sexist song was banned in students' unions and bars. It's why there's an alternate version of everyone's favourite or least favourite Christmas song, Fairy Tale of New York, that removes the homophobic F-word from the lyrics. And on that point, as Luke Turner wrote for The Guardian in 2020, as a bisexual man, a load of straight people suddenly singing cheap, lousy has made me feel uncomfortable. It isn't their word to sing. A load of white lads doing the gun fingers and rapping the N-word along with hip-hop has rightly been beyond the pale for years. Removing the word isn't rewriting history. Not screaming the homophobic F-word at the top of your lungs on Christmas Eve isn't going to mean people forget homophobia existed, because it exists. Even though some will have you believe that this means
we'll never dance to another song.
It's arguable that by doing something as small as removing that word, we work to denormalise it as a slur. To some, these kinds of small changes probably seem insignificant. There are bigger issues facing marginalised communities that need to take priority. But that doesn't mean we can't do both. Plus, it's arguable that making small changes is the most practical way to effect big change over a long period. All these things are interlinked. At this juncture, it's probably useful to recognise that all this comes down to a matter of perspective, right? What's evil 1984-style censorship to one person is an important assurance of moral conduct to another. But censorship itself, a word which I think tends to immediately invoke ideas of oppression and fear, is also kind of at the heart of basic decency and progress. Considering and potentially modifying what we want to say and do is arguably a form of self-censorship. I mean, I might be really angry at someone, but I'll try to consider their point of view, take a beat, consider my response, instead of unleashing all my feelings in an immediate reaction because free speech. Censorship, as well as being oppressive and damaging, can play a role in combating hate speech. It probably sounds strange to say, but censorship can be good when it's punching up instead of down, when it's not being used by governments to protect themselves, but to protect those in need of protection. But regardless, you scream, we shouldn't be censoring Dahl! He's not as bad as all that! Oh, wait, what's that? Under pressure from his publishers in 1973, Dahl himself removed some of his racist language from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, originally published in 1964? The National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, NAACP, objected to Dahl's original portrayal of the Oompa Loompas as African pygmies, which carried echoes of both the Gold Coast slave labour used to produce chocolate in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and the transatlantic slave trade. Censorship is why, in what is arguably Dahl's most famous children's book, we no longer have to read this. Aren't they fantastic? No higher than my knee. Their skin is almost black. You know what I think, Grandpa? Cried Charlie. I think Mr. Wonka has made them himself, out of chocolate. Wonka then denies this, but agrees with Charlie that they are indeed pygmies imported direct from Africa. They belong to a tribe of tiny miniature pygmies known as Oompa Loompas. I discovered them myself. I brought them over from Africa myself, the whole tribe of them, 3,000 in all. I found them in the very deepest and darkest part of the African jungle where no white man had ever been before. This horrendously racist stereotyping was removed. It's not okay. It never was okay, and fortunately it's been gone since 1973, and we're better off for it. Now, to some, because Dahl made those changes himself, there's no problem with this form of censorship. It's because he's dead, and the changes to his books are being made in 2023 that's the problem. These are edits he can't consent to. But people don't live forever, so if a book contains material that could be deemed offensive, and the author can't personally verify their alteration or deletion, what's to be done? If Dahl had been dead in 1973, would the general consensus have been to keep in the racist material? And what about books that are published posthumously? Editing is a very complicated job, and the ethics behind it is something I want to investigate, so subscribe and let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like to learn about. And, to complicate matters further, in the case of the 2023 Dahl edits, is it censorship? Not according to author and chair of the Society of Authors, Joanne Harris, who tweeted, "Note to anyone who needs it today. Publishers updating a book with the approval of the author's estate to ensure its saleability is not censorship. It's just business. The government forcing publishers to edit or suppress books to promote its own agenda? That's censorship." Harris went on to suggest that changes to a text are only censorship if they aren't consented to, and as Dahl's estate consented to those changes, this is not an issue of censorship. She also highlights another important point that keeps coming up in the Dahl debate, that these edits are just business. There's no religious or political censorious agenda at play here. Updating the texts is, in principle, a business-savvy strategy. In an article for Big Issue, Mark Burrows argued that plans to edit Roald Dahl's books to take out offensive terms aren't opening a new front in the culture wars, they're simply about continuing to make money. There's no slippery slope here, other than perhaps the inevitable sleigh ride through the dregs of late-stage capitalism. The Dahl edits aren't a pox on literature or a censorious nightmare. They're simply a way of continuing the franchise by making the language within them more relevant and accessible to children in 2023. Burrows continues, "It's easy to cast this stuff as culture war fodder. We're living in a state of perpetual outrage of one form or another. How dare these sanctimonious wokies tinker with the sacred texts of snot and filth that have so delighted children for decades? Most people are missing the point. The Dahl estate, which is already sensitive about this stuff, having issued a full apology for the author's notorious anti-Semitism a few years back, knows the value of its product. In making these edits, publishers are attempting to future-proof Dahl's work. They're not doing it for adults. Adults don't care. They understand the context. And they're not really doing it for the good of children either. It's about keeping the books selling. If kids sense a book is outdated, they're gonna close it pretty quickly and not pick up another one. And it's this possibility that has led some to criticise Puffin for virtue signalling. As Jemima Steinfeld writes, justification for the doll modifications seems to be along the lines of commitment to diversity and inclusivity, something we can all get behind. If Puffin and Netflix are so committed to these values, why don't they invest in and support authors from other backgrounds? After all, Roald Dahl was a white male with an anti-Semitic track record. He's hardly the poster boy of 2023. And if this is the case, if the publishers and Netflix don't care about inclusivity and diversity in any real way, is it possible that the whole controversy could be a publicity stunt? It certainly riled people up, got people talking about Dahl, enforcing his relevance and status as a cherished children's author. This is, very likely a bit of a conspiracy theory on my part, but it's not inconceivable that these big businesses who we can safely assume care about profit above all else have maybe benefited financially from the backlash. And this is one way in which the exploitation of the culture wars narrative can be extremely insidious. But it's not the only way. Sadly, yet unsurprisingly, the people working for Inclusive Minds on the Dahl edits have been the targets of online abuse. The Daily Mail published an article called "Roald Dahl books were neutered by woke consultants aged 8 to 30, led by non-binary, asexual, polyamorous relationship anarchist who is on the autism spectrum," referring to one inclusion ambassador in particular, who describes himself as such, and attempting, of course, to belittle their credibility by suggesting that, of course these evil edits were made by one of those silly, neurodiverse, wokey, nonconformist youths. And multiple articles followed suit. They relished getting to mention this person's gender identity, sexuality, neurodiversity, and polyamory, as though doing so was their ace in the hole. Look, I don't blame anyone for fearing censorship. Censorship certainly has the potential to be very scary. The idea of not being able to say what you think or feel, to do what you want to do, to be restricted by the powers that be, that's dictatorial, totalitarian mind control. But is it fair or helpful to equate the efforts of Inclusive Minds, whose intentions are to make children's literature more inclusive, with dictatorial, totalitarian mind control? I don't think so. But the edits have given way to this childish, dismissive, and deliberate aggression, spearheaded by right-wing news outlets and individuals, that forms the insidious core of the Dahl debate. It's an incredible paradox, in which GB News, Piers Morgan and co. tout unrestricted freedom of speech, while bullying and silencing anyone who expresses a difference of opinion. The incredibly aggressive response to the changes has worked as its own form of censorship, belittling and humiliating anyone who dares to even touch upon an alternate point of view. Here's a perfect example of that.
The old Enid Blyton books have language in that would be basically illegal to say to somebody now. We have to accept that some books have to be adapted, particularly with racially sensitive language. But for children, particularly with children without parents to explain, in some ways...
Be realistic. Is a child that doesn't have a parent to explain going to be given a Roald Dahl? No,
absolutely, because they're in the library at school.
Wouldn't it make much more sense rather than suppressing...
But they haven't been told it's a naughty word.
No. Of course they've been told it's a naughty word.
Let's let Rebecca respond.
Yeah. I think reading should be enjoyable, it should be fun, there is no enormous high-mindedness about it. It should be fun and great.
Wouldn't you like to see everything censored?
Would you give your child an book?
On that maxim then, you could be saying to yourself, OK, well maybe we shouldn't have Cinderella because it might be offensive to kids from blended families.
This is silly and it's pathetic, and you are on the side of the Puritans. You're a new Bowdler. You're a new Paul IV wanting to go and stick fig leaves on statues. So aren't you ashamed of it? Isn't yours a generation which is simply pathetic and frightened and suppressing and puritanical?
Nobody is saying to children, let's watch Pulp Fiction. Everybody believes on a certain level.
Do they? What about reading the Bible? So you want the Quran censored?
I think this has become intellectually dishonest at this point.
This footage is upsetting. Starkey is so aggressive, so rude, has such a tantrum. The presenter completely eggs him on. Reed has no real opportunity to make her point uninterrupted, which is a good point to consider. She's arguing that, yes, maybe in an ideal world, we'd leave the outdated language in and contextualise it for children, help them understand the past. But is that always practical? No. We can't police what children read 24/7. So, yeah, she tries to make a reasonable point. And even if it wasn't a reasonable point, do we shout over people in debates? Do we insult them and their entire generation? Do we make utterly ludicrous leaps from one issue to another in a move that is absolutely, as she says, intellectually dishonest? On GB News we do. Now, I'm not for one second suggesting that if you passionately disagree with the Dahl edits, you're a bigot. You probably care about the dangers of censorship, and absolutely fair enough. But this form of aggression, this reaction that we see from GB News et al. Is not okay. And I bet it has very little to do with protecting free speech or protecting history. It's censorship in brute form. It's a bid for control from those who shout loudest, who mock, who bully, who punch down, and who do so to silence the rest. You might be left thinking, but how do we know when censorship has gone too far? I think it's easy to be like, surely everything offends somebody. How can we possibly police this? And yes, think of a thing, there's probably someone out there who's offended by it. But to rest on that argument, to do nothing when people say or do hateful and hurtful things, to make no changes, to refuse to evolve, is a form of passivity that means no progress is ever made.
There are some nursery rhymes that were changed so long ago that many of us don't remember what their original words were. Things like "Eeny, meeny, miny, moe, catch a tiger by its toe." It wasn't originally tiger. It was N-word. And there are a number of these classic rhymes that in their original iterations would be very offensive to the contemporary ear.
Now, she raises this point and he brushes it off and it's never revisited. But it's an important concern to raise. Look back at the kinds of things children said, did, played with 50 years ago, and there are things that I'd bet most people would agree are not appropriate today. Ultimately, I'm in two minds about how much the Dahl edits matter. How effective they will be at making children feel more included, I don't know. But language is important, and making moves towards a more inclusive and diverse literary canon in small ways is important work, even though it might not seem as urgent as tackling other, louder, more obvious issues of inequality. Puffin seemed to have closed the case anyway, and the rage seems to be dying down. But I hope that whether you agree or disagree about the value of the edits, and whatever you believe about editing literature in general, you can avoid this kind of nonsense and engage in a respectful conversation. But what about your relationship to Roald Dahl? I think it's likely that for some of us, part of the anger over the edits comes from a passionate love of the books. What do we do if something we love, have loved since childhood, is deemed outdated or bigoted? I love Sex and the City. It has aged appallingly. These statements are not mutually exclusive. Now, I wasn't old enough to watch it when it first aired, so I don't know, maybe it was considered bigoted in the 90s. I love Sex and the City because it's nostalgic, it's comforting to me, it's entertaining. I'm also told that when it first aired, there were far, far fewer programmes that showcased women talking openly about their sexuality than there are today, so it was a trailblazer in that respect. Watching it today, which I do semi-regularly, I wince at a lot of things the characters say. From biphobia to transphobia to tone-deaf racism to extraordinarily classist depictions of wealth, it's just bad.
I'm very into labels. Gay, straight. Pick a side and stay there.
I am paying a fortune to live in a neighborhood that's trendy by day and tranny by night. Get your big black ass out of my face!
Can you tell me how much the bus is?
$1.50.
Really? Wow. Last time I took the bus, it was like 75 cents. You know, for $3 more you could take a cab.
It's very easy for tensions to arise when a show, game, book, film, whatever that you love is challenged. It's easy to feel personally attacked when a piece of art that you love is attacked. You tell me Sex and the City is bigoted, but what I hear is they're telling me I'm bigoted for liking that show. It's intertwined immediately with my identity, and this poses a problem when it comes to debating these things, because it's easier for me to become defensive if I feel personally attacked, if my childhood, my nostalgia, is threatened. Rebecca Alford, from online bookseller World of Books, was quoted by The Telegraph as saying that due to the edits, some parents will be sad that some of the magic from their childhood could be lost. And this, I think, is a big part of the problem. Nostalgia for our childhoods, colouring our judgment. Let's say the edits do remove the magic that older generations associate with Dahl. That doesn't take the magic out of your childhood, or mine. And it doesn't have to remove the magic from my child's childhood. Why must I impose my magic on them? You know, they'll find their own magic. I understand the feeling, but I think we need to let it go. It's okay to love a piece of art that has aged atrociously, to love the work of an artist who is an absolute arsehole, It doesn't make me a bad person for loving Sex and the City. It can be a problem, however, if, because of my love for the show, I refuse to acknowledge that those biphobic, transphobic, racist, and classist comments are not okay. And it's also a problem if I actively endorse a creator or franchise who continues to promote bigoted sentiments. I hope that the contemporary shows, books, games, etc. that I love today are deemed problematic in the future, because it's a reminder that things change and time moves on, and hopefully we become more inclusive as a society. I don't think shows like Sex and the City should be banned from all streaming platforms or anything like that, but they probably shouldn't be promoted centre stage over newer shows that represent more people fairly. And this is kind of what Philip Pullman argues, right? That maybe the best option is to let Dahl go out of print. Not to ban him or edit him, but to let new, more progressive authors have their moment in the sun. You are perfectly entitled to adore Roald Dahl and his books if you wish. I mean, my favourite film of all time is Matilda, which obviously wouldn't have existed without Dahl's writing. And recognising that there are things in those books that we might not write today or expect from a contemporary author shouldn't necessarily diminish our affections. So, to return to the big questions I opened this video with. What is censorship? Who knows? It is, like so many things, disputed across the board. To some, it's empowering, to others, it's evil. We know that it's everywhere, and has been forever. To define it in certain terms is a challenge I'm not interested in taking on. Is it ever okay to edit an author's works? Yes, I think so. Sometimes it's okay, but how far we take those edits, what we censor or change or alter is another question which, again, I don't think there is a clear answer to. What gives us the right to rewrite? Another question I barely know how to answer. Honestly, I think I included it for its wordplay value. What right? Who gives it? Are we rewriting? Aren't we always rewriting? That it's incredibly difficult, perhaps impossible, to answer these big questions clearly. And that these are some of the key questions being asked in the Dahl debate and answered by loud bigots suggests to me that they're the wrong questions to be asking. We're not going to find an easy solution when asking big questions like these that have been debated since the dawn of civilization. So perhaps we should ask smaller questions. Judge things like the Dahl edits on a case-by-case basis, while also being aware of the potentials and context and dangers and benefits as well. Consider these things with more nuance and compassion. And try not to take everything to extremes. Editing Dahl today doesn't mean you'll never dance to another song tomorrow. But if editing books over time is common practice, why did GB News make such a stink about the Dahl edits? The dark answer to that question has its roots in the manipulative potential of populism. To learn more about the link between populism, right-wing politics, and Shakespeare, click here next.